KMIR News at 11 starts now.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us here at 11, streaming live at KMIR.com. I'm Gino Lamont. Rioting began tonight almost immediately after the prosecuting attorney for St. Louis County, Robert McCulloch, announced the grand jury had decided not to indict police officer Darren Wilson in the shooting and killing of unarmed teenager Michael Brown. Police began early with tear gas, smoke bombs, and full riot protection for the city and county buildings in the area. Rioters turned over police cars, began looting, and setting several buildings on fire. Rioting continues at this hour. President Obama, speaking shortly after the announcement, asked for peaceful demonstration. That clearly did not work. The violence was not limited to Ferguson and quickly spread to several other U.S. cities, including South Central Los Angeles, New York City, Oakland, California, and Seattle, Washington. Roads and interstates have been shut down in the state of Missouri. The National Guard is on the scene, and SWAT teams and police squads are in full riot gear. The Brown family and the family of the officer did release statements. We're going to send you live now to Jay Gray, who's got the very latest on the ground in Ferguson, Missouri.
All of the squad here's car, mostly state police. In front of them, police in full riot gear. This is the line in the sand as far as officers are concerned. This is where they have met the protesters head on here in Ferguson. They continue to try and push them back here. There has been some resistance. All of this sparking after police officer Darren Wilson was not charged. No charges in the shooting death of Michael Brown. To the streets, protesting a grand jury's decision not to charge police officer Darren Wilson in the shooting death of unarmed teenager Michael Brown. The protest started at the Ferguson police station, where the angry crowd torched a squad car not long after prosecutor Bob McCulloch announced there would be no charges in the case.
They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson.
Next, it spilled into the neighborhood where Brown was killed. More gunshots and flames, businesses burned and looted, hundreds taking control of the streets. As the violence intensified, a line of police in full riot gear led by armored vehicles moved in. Still, though, late tonight there continue to be pockets of violence in an area on edge for more than 3 months, now bursting at the seams. Yeah, and in fact, there are still buildings burning here. We have had 3 along this stretch of roadway in Ferguson, a couple that have burned to the ground here, and they are still fighting fires across the city, and there are still protesters out. In fact, just in the last few minutes, more gunfire just behind us here. That is the latest live in Ferguson. I'm Jay Gray. Back to you now.
All right, Jay Gray for us live tonight in Ferguson, Missouri. Shortly after the announcement was made by the prosecuting attorney, President Obama took to the airwaves asking for calm.
First and foremost, we are a nation built on the rule of law. And so we need to accept that this decision was the grand jury's to make. There are Americans who agree with it, and there are Americans who are deeply disappointed, even angry. It's an understandable reaction. But I join Michael's parents in asking anyone who protests this decision to do so peacefully.
Among other things, the grand jury examined these photographs of Wilson taken at the hospital following the August 9th incident. Officer Wilson's medical records indicate he was in the hospital for about 2 hours. His primary diagnosis was concussion of face, scalp, neck, except eye. Now, a statement from Darren Wilson's attorney says, from the onset, we have maintained and the grand jury agreed that Officer Wilson's actions on August 9th were in accordance with the laws and regulations that govern procedures of an officer. The statement also said that based on the evidence and witness testimony, the grand jury collectively determined there was no basis for criminal charges against Officer Wilson. KMIR News legal analyst John Patrick Dolan weighed in on today's grand jury decision.
Well, it's what they call no true bill. What it means is there's no indictment. So the grand jury is charged with determining, is there probable cause to charge Officer Wilson with any crime? And there was a selection of crimes that he could be charged with: first-degree murder, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, and apparently one other potential indictment, because District Attorney McCulloch said there were 5 possible indictments, and I don't think he was counting the no indictment as part of that. So they have to determine probable cause. In this case, the grand jury looked at all kinds of evidence, spent 25 days in session, looked at 70 hours of testimony, looked at a tremendous amount of physical evidence, and came to the conclusion there was not probable cause to indict Officer Wilson for any criminal conduct.
The Brown family has released this statement, reading in part, "Disappointed that the killer of our child will not face the consequence of his action." Meanwhile, the rioting not limited to Ferguson, Missouri. At least 1,000 people marched through Union Square to protest after the Ferguson, Missouri grand jury declined to indict the white police officer in the shooting death of an unarmed black teen. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Washington, a group gathered at Westlake Center downtown following the grand jury's decision. Some of the estimated 150 demonstrators in Seattle staged what they called a die-in. Meanwhile, in South Central Los Angeles, protesters gathered at Leimert Park and marched following the announcement not to indict Darren Wilson. And in Oakland, California, hundreds of protesters marched through downtown late into the night tonight after it was announced that the Missouri grand jury would not be indicting Officer Wilson. Again, live shot here in Ferguson, Missouri. The streets continue to have rioting, looting, fires in the wake of today's grand jury decision, which was released earlier this evening. Currently, shots have been reported as being fired throughout the city. Active fires are burning, interstates are shut down, and massive looting of drugstores and other businesses in that area continue well into the night, now a little after 1 o'clock Central Time. The breaking news continues to unfold in Ferguson, and we will stay with it throughout the night and again in the morning hours. Stay tuned to KMIR for continuing coverage of the Michael Brown case and its aftermath. All right, back here in the Valley for a moment. Let's check with